Hello, everybody. I'm Phil Brandt, President and CEO of AIM Employers Association, and welcome to This Week at Work.
Welcome to This Week at Work, the only show to pack workplace news, practical HR solutions, and timely insights into every 30-minute episode. From the latest rulings in the courtroom to the strategies unfolding in the boardroom, and from real conversations taking place on the front lines to spotlighting what similar companies are doing about the challenges they face. This Week at Work brings you the conversations that matter most to HR professionals and business leaders like you. Brought to you by AIM Employers Association and Ogletree Deacons, live every Thursday morning. This is your opportunity to connect with their experts and ask your burning questions. So what's keeping you up at night? Let's face it together now on This Week at Work.
All right, welcome back. Happy Thursday, everyone. And Bert, my goodness, you look new and fresh. What's going on over there in your studio?
I don't know, Phil. I mean, it's a new.
Oh, I just lost audio. I don't know if you can hear me, Bert. I just lost audio.
I can hear you.
Okay, good. I can hear you again now. So I don't know what you said other than your makeup crew did a very good job, and they're standing steady if they need to jump in and wipe some of the sweat off your brow there.
Yes, exactly. A lighting fairy named Tim came and paid my studio a visit and brought me some new lights.
I worked with Tim for 13 years in this job and a few years in a previous role in another company, and all I will tell you is Tim will say it's all about lighting. It's
That's what he said.
lighting, but it looks great.
It's all about lighting and Nick's fine tuning.
Yeah, there you go.
Producer Nick.
Whatever it takes to make you look good. You look great, Bert. I like your new setup there.
Thank you.
I want to just share some news with you and our listeners. I don't know if you can put up on the screen there, Nick. My good friend Randy Sims, he was the founder. He was serving in capacity also as CEO. He passed away a week or so ago, and I know his wife Teresa, who is part of his business, and his team there are doing a really good job managing going forward. But Randy was a good friend, a great business partner for me. He recruited me into AIM, and he had worked so good with our members and helping them find talent. Today, I miss him, but I just want to dedicate this program to you, Randy. Just a good guy. A good human being. He loved his faith. He loved the city that he lived in. He was a great husband and a good business partner, and we'll definitely miss him from that standpoint. So this program is for Randy. And with that, Bert, I'd like to go ahead and just let's keep going, or I'll get emotional here.
Yep. Well, I'm sorry for your loss. Randy was indeed a very nice guy, and sorry for his to his family and his friends and employees, etc.
Yep, absolutely. Thank you for that. All right, so with that, Bert, we got to do lawyer on the clock here. I know you got some good things to share. I'm excited to hear them. Are you ready?
I am.
Okay. Hey, Nick, pull that lever.
Curious about a case that could wreck your workplace? Lucky for you, we have a lawyer on the clock.
So the first one I want to talk about, Phil, we have really talked quite extensively on our program about DE&I, diversity, equity, and inclusion, and I have been saying for several years now that employers that want to go down this road need to do it very carefully because there are potential legal pitfalls in implementing diversity, equity, and inclusion efforts. And a report out from a law firm called Duane Morris, which is a well-respected large law firm in the United States. They issued a report saying that the DE&I efforts are likely to spur a rise in class actions in 2025. And so I just wanted to highlight that and bring that to people's attention. DE&I challenges, as you know from the news, are on an upward trajectory. The potential increase in class actions that implicate corporate DE&I programs and other environmental, social, and governance initiatives is definitely an emerging trend. And one of the quotes that comes out of this report is that it was this one: without a blink of an eye, courts were applying the Supreme Court's decision, and that decision is the one on admissions cases at the universities involving Harvard. But without a blink of an eye, courts were applying that Supreme Court decision, and plaintiffs' class action lawyers were using it to send out attorney demand letters or to file lawsuits on behalf of clients, saying that to the extent an organization or company put diversity over merit, they were liable under that Supreme Court case.
Oh,
And
wow.
so,
Yeah.
so
That
we've
could be
seen
huge. Yeah.
well, it could be. And we've seen a range of cases brought against businesses, both on an individual basis and a class-wide basis, to challenge those sort of policy statements. Now, it's going to get even more interesting because the Supreme Court accepted a case recently called Ames, A-M-E-S, versus Ohio Department of Youth
Not
Services.
Ames Employers Association.
No.
Let's be very clear. Okay.
That's why
we're
I
not
spelled
involved
it.
in this. Yeah.
That's why I spelled it: Ames versus Ohio Department of Youth Services. The Supreme Court agreed in October to consider whether to revive a heterosexual employee suit alleging she was passed over for promotion and later demoted because of the department's bias in favor of LGBTQ employees. So again, I go back to what the employment laws say. They say we need to make employment-related decisions without regard to the protected classes. We can't consider the
That
protected
is the
classes.
key. Yes.
Yes.
Yeah.
And so
I know,
again,
we do just on that, I know your firm does, and our association does a lot of work in the space of affirmative action planning. And, it's interesting. Every now and then a client really does a great job and they say, hey, help us understand our affirmative action plan. Not just do it, but help us understand what we should, in your plan, you're committing to what you should do and what you're going to, but help us understand how to do that. How do we do that in the most unbiased way, but still meet the expectations of what we're trying to achieve without being biased in that way? And that is, it's really important to understand that and not hire for the purposes of your affirmative action plan.
that's right. It is, I have said, it is a very fine line, and you need to make sure that while you're encouraging opportunity, you can't go so far as to start making decisions based on protected classes.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay, what else you got there?
This one was really interesting to me. And a National Labor Relations Board judge, so an NLRB judge, gave approval to Apple's firing of a mass emailing engineer. And this was really interesting to me because this employee, she was an engineer working for Apple, and she was sending out mass emails and Slack messages in 2022 following disagreements with colleagues over a project she was working on. Apple eventually disciplined her and terminated her because the emails were disruptive and disrespectful. And once they fired her, she brought an NLRB charge claiming that Apple fired her because she was engaged in protected concerted activity. The board, kind of surprisingly to me, because I think that this current board has really been aggressive on these on what they consider to be protected concerted activity. Ultimately, this NLRB judge concluded that while she was complaining about workplace issues, she was complaining about workplace issues that were particular to her, and she was not engaged in protected concerted activity. She wasn't acting with at least one other employee to complain about terms and conditions of employment. So again, I think this is one of those that it serves as an illustration that
There's
the
a fine line here, isn't there? And what is actually protected, concerted, or what's one person with a microphone and or an email system speaking out or distributing a message isn't necessarily concerted.
That's right.
Now, if I elect into a group or I'm starting to correspond with the group or we're starting to plan and come together as a group, I think that's where the line would start to change. I don't know how you would describe that, but just blasting my unhappiness
Exactly.
is not protected,
Well, it's not concerted
not
activity. So,
concerted, excuse me.
and
Yeah.
I would like to give a quick shout out to Jen Betts, who's been on our program before. She was one of
Oh,
the
yeah.
attorneys that handled that case. So just a quick
Good,
shout out to her.
good job, Jen.
Yeah,
Yeah.
we'll have Jen back on
That's
at
one
some
for
point.
Ogletree.
Exactly, exactly. Another one for you, Phil, and this goes back to the origins of our This Week at Work show, when we started way back during COVID. And one of the things that we talked about was, remember when we were screening employees for whether they had COVID or not? We were
Oh, they
taking,
were lining up at the door.
yeah, we
And
were
let me guess, you're
taking,
going to say something about, do I have to pay them or not? And I
yeah,
remember our
well,
conversations. Is that where you're going?
that is exactly where I'm going with this. O'Reilly Automotive Enterprises.
O'Reilly? That O'Reilly?
That is,
Yeah.
you gave a good plug, Phil. So O'Reilly had been accused out in California, of course, of failing to compensate employees for the time they spent undergoing COVID-19 screenings before their shifts. So this is interesting. It is California specific because the case was brought under California's PAGA, PAGA law. That's their Private Attorneys General Act law. The plaintiffs had originally filed this a lawsuit under the Fair Labor Standards Act. That case was dismissed,
Mhm.
but when they refiled the suit under PAGA, it stuck, and O'Reilly settled this case for $4.1 million. And so,
Holy
yeah,
cow.
a lot
Yeah.
of money involved there, including $1.3 million in attorney's fees. Um, but just to point out again that when employees, if they're undergoing some sort of process on the way into work, you think of what we call the donning and doffing cases, particularly with respect to safety equipment and those types of things. Just a caution to employers to remember that that time is usually compensable.
Yeah, that's and I know we talked about that and we suggested yes, that should be at the time. It's too bad O'Reilly wasn't a member of ours, and in that circle of communication, we would have saved him a little bit of money there.
We would have hoped to do so. Yes.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. Anything else there, Bert?
Yeah, there was one other that I thought was kind of interesting. A black worker, a former worker, former employee of a poultry factory, uh, is arguing that the secret recordings he made during his employment should be admitted into evidence. The employer is arguing that the recordings are hearsay, and the employee is arguing, well, they're not hearsay. I made the recordings and I can authenticate them. And so the judge is considering whether to admit those recordings or not. And I really only raise the case just from the
What
standpoint.
state is that in? Does it say?
Yeah, this one is in North Carolina, and it's North
Okay.
Carolina is a one-party consent state, and so the individual said, "I made the recordings. I can authenticate the recordings. They are not there for hearsay." And judge, you should deny the employer's motion to exclude those recordings. And again, I just bring up the case to remind employers that with cell phones these days and other spy-like devices, recording devices, including what can be in an employee's eyeglasses or whatever. Just keep in mind that in your dealings with the employees, oftentimes I will tell employers, just assume you're being recorded and act accordingly on the recording or during the conversation. And also, in today's remote work environment, with things being done over Zoom, it's very easy for an employee to simply have their cell phone sitting out recording the Zoom meeting. etc. Just presume that you're being recorded, and don't say anything to the employee that you would be embarrassed to have a jury hear months or years down the road.
You know, the other thing, Bert, and that is good advice, and it'll be interesting to see how that one unfolds. I would have to imagine it may be admissible just because it is a one-party state. But the other thing that I would also offer caution on is today, imagine this scenario. You're in a serious conversation with an employee, and you have a representation of management sitting in the room with a representation of HR in the room and an employee. And for some reason, the employee leaves the room to use the restroom or get a glass of water, whatever it might be, but they leave their phone in the room. And in addition to the recording, if they have earbuds, they could put those in. That phone today transfers that very clearly to those earpods as long as they're within Bluetooth connectivity range, and that person can hear everything. So, sometimes the conversation outside the main room isn't for everyone, and it may even not be recorded, but it could be listened to. And I just offer that awareness to people because, I'm assuming you're not trying to do all the wrong things, but sometimes there is a conversation for management that isn't had with employees,
Yes.
and it could be misinterpreted, and it could create a big problem as well.
Yep. Just, again, without going overboard and becoming paranoid, just make sure you have your guard up.
Absolutely, absolutely. No, but those are some good ones there, Bert.
Yeah.
Well
I
done there.
got we had three plus a bonus topic today, Phil.
Yeah. And actually, and I know you don't know this, and we don't set it up this way, but one of our burning questions today is going to be right on cue with one of those lawsuits that you're referring to. But I'm
Perfect.
seeing some comments come through on the chat from our friends online, and they're sharing their condolences on Randy. I appreciate that. Thank you very much. Um, he was a good guy, but he had his strong faith, and I know he is doing well in the heavens above. So we'll just keep moving on here, Bert. Let's get into the burning questions. You ready?
I'm ready.
Nick, burning questions? I like that. And that's got a good sound to it, doesn't it? All
And
right.
it's kind of refreshing on this very bitterly cold day, Phil. It's just making me feel a lot warmer.
It is. For those that aren't here with us in the Midwest, we're sitting on about 11 inches of snow, and I think it got down close to zero last night. And for us here, we're done with winter and we're ready for summer. All right. Here's our burning question, Bert. I'll read it here. How should we handle this one is titled "No Hire, No Pay: Managing Unauthorized Workplace Participation." How should we handle an individual who attended department training for several days without completing onboarding paperwork or being officially hired? So I'm going to assume it's the onboarding process. They hadn't signed their offer letter, completed their I-9, or passed a background check despite multiple reminders. We marked their offer as rescinded after no response, and they were a no-show on their start date, but attended the training using a verbal offer timeline. They couldn't clock in since they weren't in the system. Should they be compensated for their time? How would you recommend addressing the situation? Now, my question to our listeners is the chat, should they be compensated? Yes or no? I'm curious what the listeners are going to flood in here with, Nick, if you can help us with that. But what do you think there, Bert?
Well, we haven't seen the responses come flowing in yet, but I say we got to pay the person.
Yeah.
Unless this was a voluntary training that wasn't necessarily work related, which under these circumstances, under this fact pattern, it sounds like it was not one of those. It sounds like it was a mandatory pre-hire or pre-start training that the individual.
Onboarding training,
Yeah,
right.
exactly. And so if it was mandatory and they had to do this in order to be fully onboarded, I think this time is going to be compensable.
Yeah, and while this sounds like an extreme example, and it is no doubt a little bit unusual, it's not the first time I've seen this type of problem,
Right.
where HR is in a big organization is doing something at a corporate level, not at a local level. Someone shows up at a local level, and they're not aware. So it is very interesting to see that question still surfacing, but. Best thing to do is send that person home until the paperwork is complete, or have some type of validation of who is and is not to be in the program and just send them home otherwise.
Yeah, and I think in this situation, there's clearly going to be a difficulty even paying the individual because they hadn't completed all of the onboarding paperwork, their tax forms, et cetera. I mean, at a minimum, though, so we don't run afoul of the Department of Labor, we should at least issue some sort of paycheck in 1099 the individual if we can't fully get them set up in our system.
Absolutely. Yeah. And I don't know. I definitely, it doesn't sound like the person liked the job after they heard and went through onboarding, so they never showed back up. That's quite
That's right.
interesting. And I think our friends on LinkedIn are saying they agree with that. All
Yep.
right. Let's see here.
Yeah.
We got another one here, Bert. Or is there some more you want to add?
Nope. I think we're good on that one.
All right, Bert. You've heard this from your dad when he taught you to drive. Eyes on the road, right? This
Yes.
one is camera policies and employee privacy. So it's right in line with what you shared in Lawyer on the Clock. Our company will be installing cameras in all of our company-owned vehicles. They are both outward and inwardly facing. What are the legal requirements around the use of employee notification? Do employees need to sign an acknowledgement that cameras are in use? Is it legal to use record audio? In this case, they're calling out, particularly in the state of Florida. And if so, what documents or notifications do we need to give employees?
Interesting question. So, the first thing that comes to mind immediately for me is this a unionized operation or non-union operation? If it's unionized, this is likely a mandatory subject of bargaining with the union. And so just make sure you take that into account. If it is a non-unionized facility or operation, I think that, I kind of go back to the two notions I always talk about when we're dealing with labor and employment law issues, Phil, and that is the ideas of consistency and fairness. And for me, this is from a fundamental fairness standpoint, I do think that we should notify employees that this type of equipment is in use. And I would go further and say that not only should we notify them, but we should get their consent and an acknowledgement that the cameras are in use. And the question is exactly on point when it says, is it legal to use and record audio? Florida, I believe, is a two-party consent state.
Yeah, that is
And
correct. It is.
yeah, and so presumably if the audio is between, let's say a dispatcher in the facility communicating with the driver in the vehicle, we're going to have to get the consent of all of those people in order to record the audio.
Yeah, I think that's an important part, right? So maybe I consent with management. Yep, that's fine. But now I'm on the speakerphone, and the person I'm talking to has not consented, hasn't even been given the advice, hey, this might be recorded for the purposes of, which can sometimes be consent in itself if you stay online. But in that case, there's no warning or information sharing, and then you're recording, and you may not be able to use that how you would hope to. But for me, beyond that, it's just the element of employee relations.
Yeah.
We don't want people thinking we're trying to pull one over, trick them, spy on them, those types of things. It's about transparency and doing it that way for those reasons as much as it is for legal reasons.
Yeah, you hear me often say on the program, I don't like when the government plays gotcha with
Right.
employers. And by the same token, I don't like when employers play gotcha with the employees. I mean, if you're going to be monitoring, let them know that. Give them an opportunity just from a fundamental fairness standpoint. let them know that you're monitoring, and hopefully they'll conform their behavior and make sure they're not doing anything they're not supposed to be doing while you're monitoring. And if they
Yeah.
do, then shame on them.
Nick, maybe we should name this the gotcha segment. Instead of the burning questions. But I just want to remind our listeners, if you have a burning question, go ahead and submit it to us. We'd like to be able to take a chance to talk about it, maybe give you some guidance as well. And you can submit those right there online. Producer Nick, what's the best way for them to do that?
Well, there's many ways. So if you're, actually, hold on a second. Let's show myself here. I'll
Oh,
make
there
my
he
appearance.
is.
So you can either go to the little question mark icon to the right of the screen if you're viewing live on the This Week at Work platform. If you're on YouTube or LinkedIn, you can either, if you have a spare device, use that QR code in the upper corner, or we should have the link in the description to ask a question. And that question can come anytime. Doesn't have to be during the show. You have something on Wednesday that comes up. We'll take a look on Thursday.
All right. Thank you for that, Producer Nick, and you look great in your studio there. All right. Let's see. We have a time one more question, Bert. Burning question here. Training tab. Is it paid or unpaid? Can we recoup our cost after termination? So the question here is, we recently termed an employee for disciplinary reasons. He was paid $751.09 for training courses he took this year. According to our leadership, he is obligated to pay it back. Unfortunately, we did not outline how that works in our policy. Do we have any recourse now? We did not deduct from his final pay. Should we or could we have? This is not an unusual question.
Yeah, so this one to me sounds like I think we need to be clear that the training course that the person took, this is more along the lines of like a tuition reimbursement type issue. The employee paid for this class, and the employer is wondering if they can use what I call self-help to recoup the cost of that training course that the individual took. And so to me, I think that if the employee voluntarily leaves or is termed for cause, I think if the policy says in those circumstances that they're going to be required to pay it back, the employer's really only left with a few options, and none of them are really good given the amount of money involved here. So again, this is what I would call self-help by the employer, that they could either deduct from the employee's final paycheck, but this is very, very state law dependent. There are many states out there that say that you may not make any deductions from an employee's final paycheck. There are other states out there that say you may make a deduction, but only with the employee's consent. And then that's broken down even further, and those separate out into states like Missouri, where you can get consent anytime during the employee's employment, versus states like Illinois, where you can deduct only if the employee's consent is contemporaneous with the deduction. So at
There's
the
a
time
nice word. Look at
yes.
that. Contemporaneous.
Well, and how many employees do you think are going to say when you give them their final paycheck, will you consent to us deducting the cost of the training course, even though we're firing you? And they're going to, of course, say no. So then you're left with the recourse. Do you sue at small claims court? It's probably not going to be worth it. There's also some exempt, non-exempt issues that might come into play if you are in a state that would allow you to deduct from the final paycheck. One thing you want to make sure that you're doing is you're not deducting the individual below minimum wage.
Yep, I'm glad you mentioned that. Yep.
Yeah. And even if it's an exempt employee and you do the deduction, you need to make sure you're not deducting the exempt employee below minimum wage as well. You may be jeopardizing the exemption for that pay period, which could cause other problems. But this is one that's going to be highly fact specific and highly state specific. Before you use self-help, you would definitely want to get some legal guidance.
Where I see the most common mistake made from the calls that we get and the conversations I'm involved in is people believe they can deduct, and then they do. Our organizations believe they should and can deduct, and they do, and they bring it below the minimum wage, right? They're writing a check for what the remaining balance is due to you is $20, and it's for a 40-hour work week, and that's where they make a common mistake and forget about that minimum wage element.
Yeah, I agree with you, Phil. That's where it comes up very often. And, it's not just with respect to like tuition reimbursement, like this.
No, it's for whatever
yeah. It's loss from a cash register. It's missing tools, missing uniforms, et cetera, et cetera. Employers want to try to use self-help many times at the end of the employment relationship. And again, I just caution it is highly fact specific and highly state specific. And you should get legal advice before you make those deductions.
All right. Well, that's our burning questions for this week. Again, we'd love for you to submit your questions. We'll do our best to get to those. And we'll do our best to keep those anonymous and protect the identity of the innocent or the guilty. So please let us know if we can help you out. Bert, great job. Again, you're looking good. And to my friend Teresa, Randy's husband, we are so sorry for your loss. Randy was a true gentleman, a great business partner, and he will be missed. But we will be back here next Thursday at 7:30 Central Time, and we'll see you then. Until then, go out and be good to somebody. Bye-bye.
Thank you once again for tuning in to This Week at Work. If you enjoy the show, please like it, share it, and make sure it's on your calendar. If you're an on-demand viewer, don't forget you can be part of the show by watching live at 7:30 a.m. Central every Thursday morning, when you can get your burning questions answered by using the question mark icon to the right of the player. In fact, you can ask a question now. Head over to aimea.org. Under Member Resources, you'll find This Week at Work. Click Listen Live to register for our next episode and submit a question. Or follow or subscribe wherever you get your news and entertainment. We'll see you next week when we discuss what's happening this week at work.